In the frozen wasteland of northern Siberia, archaeologists discovered something that changed everything we thought we knew about ancient survival. It was a mass grave, thousands of years old, filled with the remains of dozens of humans. But here is what made this discovery so disturbing. The bones told two very different stories. Half of these people had died slowly, painfully, their remains showing signs of prolonged starvation and disease. But the other half had died quickly, violently, their skulls crushed by deliberate force. Someone had made a choice. Someone had decided who would live and who would die. And when researchers analyzed the evidence more closely, they realized this was not random violence. This was a system, a primitive rule that our ancestors had followed for hundreds of thousands of years. A rule so brutal, so uncomfortable, that modern society has tried to bury it completely. But here is the terrifying truth. That rule never disappeared. It still operates today, just in different forms, and whether you realize it or not, you are being judged by it right now. To understand this rule, we have to go back to a time before civilization, before agriculture, before anything resembling the world we know today. Imagine yourself living 100,000 years ago. You are part of a small band of humans, maybe 30 or 40 individuals at most. There are no grocery stores, no hospitals, no safety nets of any kind. Every single day is a battle against starvation, predators, disease, and the elements. Resources are scarce, food is never guaranteed, and every mouth to feed is a calculation. In this world, there is no room for sentiment, no space for modern ideas about equality or universal rights. There is only one question that matters. What do you contribute? This was the primitive rule, the law of contribution, and it was absolute. Those who could hunt, gather, defend, heal, teach, or reproduce were valuable. They received protection, food, and care. Those who could not contribute, for whatever reason, faced a different fate entirely. They were left behind, abandoned during migrations, given smaller portions of food, or in some cases, actively removed from the group. This sounds monstrous to our modern sensibilities, but our ancestors were not monsters. They were survivors. They understood something that we have forgotten in our comfortable modern world. Resources are finite. Energy is finite. And when survival is on the line, hard choices are not optional. They are mandatory. The evidence for this primitive rule is everywhere once you know what to look for. Ancient human remains from every continent show the same patterns. Individuals with severe disabilities or chronic conditions rarely survived to old age in prehistoric societies. Not because our ancestors were cruel, but because the mathematics of survival did not allow for extended care of those who could not contribute. A single injured hunter consuming food without providing any meant less nutrition for children, pregnant women, and active providers. In a world where starvation was always one bad season away, this was not a moral question. It was an equation. But here is where the story gets more complex and more fascinating. The primitive rule was never as simple as abandoning the weak. Our ancestors were far more sophisticated than that. They developed an intricate system for assessing value that went far beyond physical strength. Consider the role of elders in prehistoric societies. By strict interpretation of the contribution rule, the elderly should have been abandoned once they could no longer hunt or gather effectively. But archaeological evidence tells a different story. Many ancient humans survived well past their productive physical years. Why? Because our ancestors recognized something crucial. Knowledge itself is a resource. An elder who remembered the location of water sources during a drought, who knew which plants were poisonous, who could predict animal migrations based on decades of observation, that elder was more valuable than 10 young hunters. They carried survival information that could not be replaced. The primitive rule was never simply about physical contribution. It was about total value to the group's survival. And this distinction reveals something profound about human nature. We have always been calculating creatures. We have always been unconsciously measuring the worth of everyone around us. Not out of cruelty, but out of necessity. This instinct is hardwired into our psychology, and it has never left us. Consider how you react when you meet someone new. Within seconds, your brain is making rapid assessments. Are they a potential threat? A potential ally? What skills might they have? What resources might they control? You are not aware of these calculations. They happen below conscious thought, but they are happening constantly, shaping your behavior, your trust levels, your willingness to invest in relationships. This is the primitive rule operating in modern form. We still judge everyone we encounter through the lens of contribution and value. We just do not admit it. The ancient world was ruthless in enforcing this rule, but it was also remarkably fair in one sense. Contribution could take many forms. Physical strength was valued, but so was healing knowledge, tool-making skill, storytelling ability, spiritual leadership, and social intelligence. Someone who could resolve conflicts within the group was just as valuable as someone who could kill a mammoth. The primitive rule created space for different types of contribution because survival required diverse skills. No single individual could do everything necessary to keep a group alive. This meant that ancient human bands were in some ways more accepting of human diversity than we might expect. They had to be. Survival demanded it. But the rule also had a darker side that we need to examine honestly. When resources became critically scarce, when drought or disease or disaster pushed a group to the edge of extinction, the calculations became brutal. Historical and archaeological evidence from extreme survival situations reveals patterns that are deeply uncomfortable to discuss. Groups facing starvation sometimes made choices that defy modern moral frameworks. The very young and very old were often the first to perish, not from natural causes but from deliberate reduction of their food allocation. Injured or sick members were sometimes left behind during emergency migrations, and in the most extreme cases, some groups resorted to practices that we can barely bring ourselves to name. These are not stories we tell in schools. They are not part of our cultural mythology. We prefer to imagine our ancestors as noble savages, living in harmony with nature and each other. But the truth is far more complex. Our ancestors were capable of tremendous compassion and tremendous cruelty, often simultaneously. They loved their children and sometimes sacrificed them. They honored their elders and sometimes abandoned them. They formed deep bonds with their band members and sometimes killed them when survival demanded it. The primitive rule was not a moral philosophy. It was a survival algorithm, and algorithms do not care about feelings. What makes this history relevant today is how thoroughly we have buried it. Modern civilization is built on the premise that the primitive rule no longer applies. We have created systems designed specifically to override it. Welfare programs, disability protections, elder care, universal human rights. These are all attempts to escape the brutal logic of our ancestors. And they have worked to a remarkable degree. For the first time in human history, people who would have been abandoned or eliminated in prehistoric times can now live full, comfortable lives. This is genuine progress. It represents a real triumph of human civilization over human nature. But there is a problem, a significant one. The primitive rule never actually disappeared. It just went underground. It still operates in our psychology, in our social structures, in our economic systems. We have suppressed it, but we have not eliminated it. And when conditions become difficult, when resources become scarce, when survival pressure increases, the primitive rule starts to reassert itself. We see this pattern throughout history. Civilizations during collapse consistently return to primitive calculations about human value. Economic depressions trigger hostility toward those seen as non-productive. Famines produce impossible choices about who receives food. Pandemics create hierarchies of whose lives matter most. The comfortable world that allows us to reject the primitive rule is not permanent. It is not guaranteed. It depends on abundance, stability, and functioning institutions. When those fail, the old calculations return with frightening speed. This is why understanding the primitive rule is not just an academic exercise. It is a matter of practical survival knowledge. Because if you understand the rule, you can prepare for its return. You can position yourself to survive its reemergence. And you can recognize when it is beginning to reassert itself, long before others notice. The first sign that the primitive rule is returning is always the same. Questions start being asked about contribution. Who deserves resources? Who is pulling their weight? Who is taking more than they give? These questions seem innocent at first, even reasonable, but they are the leading edge of something much darker. Once a society starts sorting people into contributors and non-contributors, the logic of the primitive rule begins its inevitable progression. This is not a political statement. It is a historical pattern that repeats across cultures, time periods, and political systems. But the primitive rule contains within it not just a warning, but also a path to survival. If value and contribution determine survival outcomes during difficult times, then the answer is clear: become valuable. Become someone who contributes in ways that cannot be easily replaced. This was the survival strategy of our ancestors who lived to old age. They made themselves essential through knowledge, skills, and social connections. They understood that contribution was a form of insurance against the harsh calculations of scarce times. The skills that provided value 100,000 years ago are not entirely different from those that provide value today. The ability to find and prepare food, to heal injuries and illness, to navigate and orient yourself in unfamiliar territory, to build and repair shelter, to resolve conflicts and maintain group cohesion, to teach and transmit knowledge. These capabilities still mark someone as valuable, even in our modern world, and they become dramatically more valuable when modern systems begin to fail. Consider what happens when a natural disaster disrupts normal society. Suddenly, the modern economy becomes irrelevant. Your job title means nothing. Your social media following provides no advantage. What matters is practical capability. Can you provide clean water? Can you administer first aid? Can you organize people effectively? Can you remain calm while others panic? Can you make difficult decisions under pressure? These are the ancient survival skills repackaged for modern crisis. They are what mark someone as a contributor when contribution becomes the measure of worth. There is another dimension to the primitive rule that we need to understand: social value. In ancient bands, someone who maintained group harmony, who resolved disputes, who kept morale high during difficult times, was considered extremely valuable. This was not soft sentimentality. It was hard survival logic. Groups with strong social cohesion survived challenges that destroyed fractured groups. A skilled mediator might never hunt a single animal, but could prevent the internal conflicts that caused bands to splinter and fail. This role remains crucial today, perhaps more crucial than ever. Modern society is experiencing a crisis of social cohesion. Isolation, fragmentation, and conflict are increasing everywhere. The ability to bring people together, to maintain relationships, to build and sustain community, these skills are becoming rarer and more valuable. When difficult times return, and history suggests they always do, social architects will be among the most protected members of any group. They will be the ones who hold communities together while others tear themselves apart. The primitive rule also reveals an uncomfortable truth about modern life. Many people today would not survive the return of ancient conditions. Not because they are bad people, but because they have no survival skills, no practical knowledge, no physical resilience, and no social value in crisis conditions. They exist entirely within a system that provides for their needs without demanding contribution in return. This is not a moral judgment. It is a vulnerability assessment, and it is one that you can change. The most empowering aspect of understanding the primitive rule is recognizing that contribution is a choice. You can develop skills, you can build physical resilience, you can accumulate practical knowledge, you can strengthen social connections, you can transform yourself from someone who would be vulnerable under primitive conditions to someone who would be protected and valued. This transformation does not require abandoning modern life. It means adding capabilities that modern life typically does not develop. It means becoming someone who could survive and contribute across a wide range of conditions. What our ancestors understood, what we have forgotten, is that resilience is not passive. It is not something you either have or lack. It is built through deliberate practice and preparation. Every skill you develop, every physical challenge you overcome, every piece of practical knowledge you acquire, every genuine relationship you build, These all increase your contribution potential. They all improve your position under the logic of the primitive rule. The psychological dimension of this preparation matters as much as the practical. Ancient humans who survived extreme conditions shared certain mental characteristics. They could accept harsh realities without denial or despair. They could make difficult decisions quickly. They could endure suffering without giving up. They could cooperate effectively under pressure. These mental capabilities are not fixed at birth. They can be developed. Exposure to controlled difficulty. Practice making decisions under stress. Training yourself to face uncomfortable truths without flinching. These all build the psychological resilience that our ancestors needed for survival. Modern comfort has created a generation unprepared for hardship. This is not a criticism but an observation. When everything is easy, the capacity for difficulty atrophies. When all needs are met without effort, the ability to struggle productively disappears. When discomfort is always avoided, tolerance for discomfort evaporates. The primitive rule operated in a world of constant difficulty. Those who survived were those who could handle it. Building that capacity now, before it becomes necessary, is perhaps the most important preparation you can make. There is a final dimension to the primitive rule that deserves attention. The rule itself could be suspended under certain conditions. When resources were abundant, when survival pressure was low, ancient groups could afford generosity beyond strict contribution calculations. The sick could be cared for, the elderly could be honored, the weak could be protected. Abundance created space for compassion. This pattern offers hope. The primitive rule is not our inevitable fate. It activates under conditions of scarcity and stress. By working to maintain abundance, stability, and social trust, we can keep it dormant. The rule is a warning about what happens when systems fail, not a prescription for how we should live. The knowledge you now possess comes with responsibility. Understanding the primitive rule means understanding both its dangers and its lessons. It means recognizing how quickly civilization can retreat to ancient calculations. It means seeing the warning signs before they become obvious to everyone. It means preparing yourself to survive conditions that others refuse to imagine. And it means working to build the abundance and stability that keep the primitive rule inactive. Our ancestors survived unimaginable hardships to bring humanity to this moment. They made difficult choices that we now have the luxury to judge. They followed brutal rules that we now have the privilege to reject. But their survival instincts, their calculating nature, their ability to make hard decisions, these remain encoded in our psychology. We are still them, just wearing modern clothing and holding modern technology. The primitive rule decided who lived and who died for most of human history. It was suspended, not eliminated, by the abundance of modern civilization. And in the unconscious depths of every human mind, it continues to operate, measuring, calculating, judging. The question is not whether this rule exists. The question is what you will do with this knowledge. Will you remain comfortable and vulnerable, assuming that modern protections will last forever? Or will you begin building the skills, resilience, and value that would ensure your survival under any conditions? The choice, as it has always been, is yours.